morning. My name is Penny Featherstone, and I use the pronouns she and her. And I want to take a moment to ask you to silence your electronics other than those that are used for hearing. Welcome to everyone, and we're really glad you're here. I hear young voices, and it's very nice to know that we're growing and have people of all ages here. Our chalice lighting. We gather this hour as a people of faith, with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning, in celebration of the life we share together.
The opening words today are about what we're going to be doing today in the service. And I'm reminded often by individuals that come to visit the congregation, maybe come for a month or 6 months or a year, and then they say, "You have such traditions in this church, but you never talk about them. I don't know what to expect. We're not know what to expect at this congregation." And for me, I say, Yahoo! However, for new people, that's not always the way they feel. It's uncomfortable, they're not sure, they don't know what's coming. But one of the traditions that we have that's not really spoken until it arrives, and that's Martin Luther King. And we honor this weekend every year. Obviously, you've heard about the tradition of being in the parade, but we also honor him in the pulpit. And we will do that today, along with some other civil rights leaders. Thus, saying that, we have put the chairs in rows, specifically designed as if it were a bus. Now, they are 2 wide buses because there are 3 rows on each side, but to accommodate lots of people, we had to go from 2 rows to 3 rows. But today I'm going to call it the Passion Bus. The presentation in no way covers, or perhaps even touches, the depth of the commitment, the terror, or the pain that the Freedom Riders experienced. However, perhaps today we can leave not just with the details or the facts about the Freedom Riders, but the realization of the passion, the courage, and commitment that African Americans and white people together demonstrated with nonviolent civil disobedience. In addition to this, I hope we open our own self-awareness of how the Freedom Riders were perhaps unknowingly riding for all of us. And now if you'll stand, we'll have our opening hymn. Love Will Guide Us. It's number 131.
In the gray book.
In the gray book, and the choir will lead us.
Our covenant will be on the screen. Love is the spirit of this church, and service its law. This is our covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
During our offertory, which will be next, we take an offering each week. We have many people that pledge regularly, but we want to have an opportunity for everyone to be able to share in supporting this congregation. We are self-sustaining, and we do not have a larger community necessarily that supports our congregation, so we are proud of that as well. But we do appreciate offering. Before the offering is passed around, I wanted to introduce the song that you're going to hear. This song is written by Reggie Harris. He's a singer-songwriter. The song will be sung by his wife, Kim Harris. And he's developed many programs, but one of them is Living Legacy Project. And it offers education. It also offers pilgrimage to build bridges between the past, the present, and the future. There are some people from our congregation that have actually gone on some of these pilgrimages and absolutely loved it. Paula Montgomery and Bill Kaplinger are two of those people. And Paula recommended this song. When you listen to the words of the song, you will hear perhaps the broad scope of injustice that maybe, if we think deeply, that the Freedom Riders also help to highlight and influence. Thank you. I have to say, this has been one of the most difficult presentations I've ever put together. The passion and the compassion and the dedication that people gave to this endeavor and continue to give comes through so strongly when you begin to dive into the Freedom Riders or any other act of civil disobedience. I also have to say that just sitting here reflecting on the joys and concerns, I understand now why I have experienced as much pain as each of you as you shared what you have become passionate about. It permeates the room, it permeates this weekend, it permeates who we are as individuals. And so, as I have tearfully created this and rewritten this probably 20 times in my mind, never knowing what I was going to present today until about 9 o'clock. And then at 10 o'clock, you blew my mind with the candle lighting. So take the candle lighting, take the song, and may you take some of the passion with you when you leave this service. But I will present what I have typed in some format. On this Martin Luther King Jr. holiday, as we honor him and his work, which many of you have experienced by meeting him, etc., perhaps the influence of his work is less acknowledged at times. The Freedom Riders evolved due to his presence and his convictions as well. Perhaps we can learn about their passion and compassion and their commitment from a small group of people that still affect our lives today. And may this passion dwell within us and surface. As I began to read and prepare for this presentation, I had to question myself. Who am I to even try to tell this story, or even tell a part of it? And I had that continuing story in my own mind and words in my own mind. If not me, then who? And if not now, then when? So I decided to give it a shot. I still have knots in my stomach now, standing here before you, and tears in my eyes, thinking and reading of events of extreme violence, beatings, arrests, time spent in jail, with some that were arrested and transferred to the most horrific and harsh of all penal systems in Mississippi. Freedom Riders is really a story of stories. And for this presentation, I will highlight two men, John Lewis and Jim Zerwig. John Lewis from Alabama, raised in a poor family, and Jim Zerwig from Wisconsin, raised with wealth and little to none experience or interactions with people of color. In 1958, Nashville, Tennessee, a group of college students began to learn and practice and study the work of Martin Luther King Jr. and Mahatma Gandhi, who were regarded as the leaders of nonviolence movement in civil disobedience. They proclaimed it and they demonstrated it in their lives. And by 1961, this small group, this college group, had already begun to make changes in their own community. Theaters, movie theaters began to allow black and whites to sit together downstairs, and the black people did not have to climb the outside railings up to the top. They had lunch sit-ins at counters, all in their community, and John Lewis began to direct the close-knit group when a young white man from Wisconsin arrived at the college and joined the movement, and his name was Jim Zerwig. Thoughts may run through your mind when as it did mine, where was I in 1960? And when did I even learn or hear about the Jim Crow laws or Freedom Riders? You might have been in elementary school, you might have been in secondary school, you might have been in college. And I had to ask myself, what do I remember? And what did I learn, and how did I learn it then? I lived in the North. And if you weren't born at all, did you learn anything about this in school? So what does history have to do with me? And what can I learn from it? The Freedom Riders didn't really start in the 60s. As far back as the 19th century, African Americans had challenged the segregated seating on public transportation. Stories of Sojourner Truth being struck by a train conductor for refusing to give up a choice seat. She later sued and she won, and the man was fired. Frederick Douglass clinging to the whites-only bench as he was pulled from a train, and it is reported to have held on to that seat until it literally tore loose from the floor. These are only two examples of perhaps hundreds of individuals that worked to make changes happen. There was something missing, though, perhaps. Perhaps it was a plan or a structure and the passion of many people together. In 1946, the Supreme Court outlawed segregation seating on interstate travel. And with this decision, it was Irene Morgan versus Virginia. After that, there were two fellowships that were created, the Fellowship of Reconciliation and the Congress of Racial Equity called CORE, although they may have been organizations that were in existence prior to the ruling, but they became more active. And they decided to test this ruling by calling it the Journey of Reconciliation. And they went through Virginia, Tennessee, Kentucky, and North Carolina. The cities were treating the court ruling as if it never happened. And even at that time, some people were jailed. So in May of 1961, there were a small group of black and white passengers that boarded a bus headed south in the name of freedom. They left Washington, D.C. with a destination of New Orleans. However, near Birmingham, they were attacked by the Ku Klux Klan and many others, and the bus was burned. I'm using this book as a reference. This is a book that is put out by it's honored by the National Geographic Society. And this writer wrote significantly about John Lewis and Jim Zerg. The picture up here in the far corner is the two of them. Later I'm going to talk about when they engaged. They did not engage initially in the Freedom Riders, and I will refer to that later. But I want you to see this picture specifically, and it is blood that is dripping from both of them. This picture was taken in Montgomery, and under one of the pictures, as I was filing through, it said, "A man with a finger in his mouth," never referring at all to being part of the civil disobedience or the violence that occurred in Montgomery. And this picture is of John Lewis and Jim Zerg, who together were significantly impacted, not only by participating, but years later. And years later, they've come together, and these are, on the lower is, of course, John Lewis, who many people are aware of and many people talk about, and of course he's been in our lives for years and years and recently deceased. But very few knew about Jim Zerg at the same level, unless you had done a lot of research and understanding of Freedom Riders. So, excuse me. So back to May 1961. So I want to stop and ask you just to think where you were, or where you weren't if you weren't alive. Or where you were when you actually, maybe in school, had the history given to you. Or today, the possibility that it'll never be delivered, given rules and laws that are trying to be passed to suppress the information. And what would it be like if we didn't know it? So in May of 1961, this small group of black and white passengers boarded the bus south, and they called themselves For Freedom. They left Washington, D.C., as I said, destined to New Orleans. However, near Birmingham, they were attacked, and their bus was burned. And I believe this picture on the left, your left, is about the only picture of one of the times of the riders, because the Klan and the violence created with bats and all kinds of instruments also attacked all of the photographers, as well as all of the newspaper and journalists, and they destroyed all of the pictures and the evidence. And this is one of the scenes that actually escaped being confiscated at the time. Part of my struggle with this presentation is how much of this do we actually allow ourselves to endure, and how much visual do we actually need to experience the pain. So I've been careful to select pictures that were tempered. And we can look at the next photo. This one's probably the most difficult, and so you can close your eyes if you choose to. The realization of this bus being attacked and in flames ignited a small group of students from Nashville, led by John Lewis, to join the movement. So at that time they did. They loaded the bus, headed to Birmingham and Montgomery, and eventually to Jackson, Mississippi. There were multiple altercations and beatings occurring through the days of being on the bus. Refusals to transport the riders residing in the bus terminals. Federal and local authorities became involved. When arriving near Montgomery, the 21 riders were attacked, and since Jim Zerg was the only white male, he was targeted first and the longest. And you'll see him on the left of the screen. This actually allowed others to escape. The police did not intervene. The ambulances did not come. The people who did come, if they were white, only took white people. If the black people needed a ride, they were required to ride, and black drivers wouldn't take white people. When Jim was finally admitted to the hospital, when he was picked up and taken, he actually thought he was going to be lynched. When he arrived at the hospital with severe injuries, he was interviewed by the press, even though he doesn't have any memory of this, and I'm sure that has to do with a concussion. It became a call to action, and it spread throughout the country. It was this interview that he did with the press that I will quote now, according to the writer. It was as if the Pied Piper himself was rounding up volunteers Individuals dropped what they were doing and headed off to join the freedom rides. Black, white, young and old, students, professors, members of the clergy, rabbis, Quakers, Northerners, Southerners, males, females, boarded planes, boarded trains, boarded buses, and bound themselves toward the segregated South, Arkansas to Florida, Georgia to Louisiana. The country was now engaged. John Lewis and Jim Zerg were begged by their parents not to go on this ride. Their decision to ride negatively impacted their relationship with their parents. The parents began to talk about how shameful they would feel having their children ride those buses. They were shamed as a family. Culturally, it was shaming to think that your children were involved in this action. They were concerned about their lives and how they would be viewed in life. After Jim met with a near death, his father literally had a heart attack. Their relationships with their parents were estranged for years. When confronted with why they responded to the call, they responded with, because it's the right thing to do. Jim went on to become a minister. John Lewis continued as a civil rights activist. And I'm going to pause for a minute. The next slide shows you the original that we talked about today in the yellow from Washington, D.C., until it was stopped in Birmingham. And the red line is the path of the younger group, 20-year-olds, that left the college on their way to Jackson. Now that looks like a straight route, and it took them days and days and days. Many of the times it would go to part of it and then they would back up, or they would go further and then they would go back. It was not a straight shot by any means. And I want to go to the next slide. And you'll see all of the freedom rides. It wasn't a one ride. It wasn't a direct shot. It was multiple rides and multiple times that these endeavors to cross the state lines took place. The yellow line started in April 22nd, and you can see that there's a line all the way to December 1st. So there were many attempts and rides, and many times that people walked into depots, for example, a bus depot, and were accosted or beaten just for walking into the white area of a bus depot or walking into the restroom that was written or noted as whites only. Sometimes there were days that they spent time in bus depots waiting for a bus to be able to go to the next town. And at one point they were granted National Guard to protect them on the bus, with the agreement that once they got there and got off the bus, they would all be arrested, which is exactly what happened. Jim, and I'm not sure what the next slide is. Okay. Jim Zerg went on to become a minister. John Lewis continued as a civil rights activist, eventually became a member of Congress. They have been lifelong friends. Jim was quoted, "If I had to pick one man that I wanted to stand at my side, I'd have to pick John. I knew he wouldn't break. John would be there. John would be the rock." Years later, when Jim was riding the bus with an African-American youth, he realized he The youth knew nothing about freedom rides, and it was a commonplace for him to ride at the front of the bus. So when Jim was asked, "Did we accomplish anything?" he responded, "Absolutely." And again, I'm going to quote, "The freedom rides changed how people travel. They revolutionized the civil rights movement by attracting young people and non-Southerners to the cause. They tested and strengthened future leaders of the struggle, both during the rides and with the jail time that followed. They even added a new phrase to the movement, Freedom Rider, a tag often given to people who put their lives on the line for a cause. But there were downsides too. Competition developed between civil rights organizations. Violence grew from groups such as the Ku Klux Klan. And in addition, some civil rights activists began to favor their own more militant action also. Can we learn from their passion and their commitment? Can we apply it to our own lives? May we think about what we're passionate about. What is it that's important to us? What is it that we need to be giving to our world? What relationships are we building? What relationships help us to drive that passion and our commitments? And do we have that person that represents the rock that's with us? Our community and world need our passion and commitment to change. And I'm going to close with some words from both Jim and John. I say their names as if I were a personal friend, and I have the right to say their first name only. That's a misnomer. From Jim, 40 years ago, I participated in a movement that transformed my life forever. I never had a period in my life where my faith was as strong, my commitment as deep, and my emotions higher. It was a period where I got to live on a special plane with some very special people. And for John Lewis, his quote, "We didn't give up. We didn't give in. We didn't despair. We kept the faith. We kept our lives on the prize, and may it be so." And we will have our closing hymn.
One. You gotta do what the Spirit says do. You gotta do what the Spirit says do. When the Spirit says do, you gotta do, oh Lord. You gotta do what the Spirit says do.
passion, compassion, and love. Go in peace.
Amen.